The truth about what was hidden beneath Gene Hackman's property is finally surfacing, and the people who spent 40 years making sure it stayed buried are watching the same news cycle you are right now. They thought this story ended with him, a 95-year-old man, advanced Alzheimer's, natural causes, case closed. What they did not account for was the forensic photographer who put her hand against the wrong wall in his private library, felt something hollow on the other side, and walked into something that has never appeared in a single official FBI statement. What she found beneath that house was not just a secret. It was a warning, the routine call. February 26, 2025. Federal agents pulled up to Gene Hackman's Santa Fe property on a cold morning, with body cameras rolling and no expectation of anything unusual. The front door was unlocked. Pills were scattered across a bathroom counter. One dog had died in a closet. 2 more were still moving through the grounds, disoriented and hungry. Inside the house, 2 bodies. Hackman, 95. His wife, Betsy Arakawa, 65. Betsy had actually died nearly 3 weeks earlier, around February 3rd. Her body had sat undiscovered while the world went about its business. The official cause of death for Gene was cardiovascular disease, with Alzheimer's listed as a contributing factor. Routine, sad, unremarkable. That is what the paperwork says. What the paperwork does not say is that the agents standing in that house were minutes away from finding something that would change the entire shape of the investigation. Something concealed behind a wall in his private library. Something the official record has been carefully avoiding ever since. Because once you understand what that estate actually was, the natural causes explanation does not just develop holes, it falls apart completely. The fortress. This was not a celebrity retreat. What Gene Hackman constructed in the high desert of New Mexico was closer to a secure installation than a private home. And the people who designed it understood exactly what they were building. Before moving forward, please subscribe to our channel and help us reach our target of 1,000 subscribers. Richard Castagnano spent 2 decades as a security consultant for diplomats, defense contractors, and Fortune 500 executives with genuine adversaries. When he was brought in to assess the Hackman property for an insurance evaluation in 2019, his first instinct was to check the file for a clerical error. He was certain the address had been mixed up with something else. "I have worked on embassy compounds," Castagnano said. "I have consulted for clients inside the defense industry. This estate had infrastructure that would have impressed people in those worlds." What he encountered was not celebrity paranoia. In every technical detail, it resembled a government installation built to look like a private residence. 23 acres of dense forest created a natural outer perimeter. 12-foot stone walls enclosed the full property. Reinforced steel gates. Motion detection arrays calibrated to differentiate between wildlife and human movement. Thermal imaging cameras positioned with overlapping fields of view, designed by someone who understood precisely how a trained operative would approach. A surveillance grid that exceeded the protection Castagnano had seen deployed around foreign dignitaries on American soil. And the perimeter was just the beginning. Inside the structure, there were redundancies that made no sense for a private home. Separate power systems for what Castagnano described as sensitive zones within the building. Hardened communication lines that did not appear on any publicly filed schematic. A backup generator rated for operational periods no celebrity household would ever require. Staff were handpicked, thoroughly vetted, and bound by non-disclosure agreements covering not just what they saw and heard, but also what they were asked to construct. That last detail matters because the security systems were not what raised red flags. What raised red flags were the things former contractors remembered being hired to build. Miguel Reyes had worked foundation and structural projects in Santa Fe for 30 years. He understood concrete the way a master craftsman understands his material, intuitively, at a level that goes beyond instruction. When he received the call about the Hackman property in the early 2000s, he expected routine work. It was not. There were sections of the lower structure where they specified walls 18 inches thick, Reyes recalled. That is not storage. That is not a wine cellar. That is bunker-grade construction. I asked what the space would be used for. I was told storage. You do not build storage like you are preparing to survive a detonation. Reyes was paid 3 times his standard rate and signed a non-disclosure agreement prohibiting him from discussing the project for 20 years. That agreement expired in 2024, 1 year before Hackman's death. When investigators asked Reyes to describe the full scope of what he had built, he could not, because he had only worked on one section. Other contractors handled the deeper work, specialists operating under a different tier of confidentiality entirely. Reyes was told those lower levels did not exist. He was told that more than once. But Reyes was not the one who found what was actually down there. That came 2 decades later. And it started with a wall that was not a wall. The wall that wasn't a wall. Dr. Patricia Okino arrived at Gene Hackman's property on February 26th as part of the initial FBI response team, expecting the quiet stillness that settles over places where elderly people have died peacefully. She was not prepared for what she encountered. "Something felt wrong the moment I stepped inside," she said later. The house looked as it was supposed to look, but the details did not align. Furniture had been moved recently. There were ghost impressions in the carpet where pieces had stood for years, with fresh displacement marks showing recent repositioning. Scuff patterns on the hardwood floors did not match the movement of 2 elderly people with limited mobility. Documents in Hackman's study appeared to have been sorted through and hastily returned to their positions. 2 explanations presented themselves. Either someone had methodically searched the house, room by room, or Hackman himself, in his final weeks, had been deliberately relocating things, ensuring what he wanted discovered would be found, and what he wanted buried would stay buried. Neither explanation fit the story of 2 elderly people dying quietly of natural causes. The moment that changed everything happened in the library. Okino was moving her hands across the mahogany paneling, checking for hidden compartments. Standard protocol. You do it not because you expect to find something. You do it because you cannot afford to miss it. That is when she felt it. A section of wall, roughly 4 feet wide, that resonated differently when tapped. Not solid, hollow, something behind it. The panel concealed a seam so precise it would have been completely invisible from any standard angle. When she found the correct pressure point, the wall shifted. What was waiting on the other side stopped her cold. A narrow passageway cut directly into stone, steps worn smooth by decades of use, spiraling downward into absolute darkness. The air rising from below was cold, damp, and carried a smell one agent later described as like opening something that had been sealed for a very long time, except it had not been entirely undisturbed. The tunnel walls showed modern reinforcement in several sections. Fresh electrical conduit ran along the upper edges. Someone had been maintaining this passage recently. The passageway measured roughly 36 inches wide, descending at a steep angle. The original stonework appeared nearly a century old, but whoever built it had not simply dug a hole. They had engineered something designed to endure indefinitely. The question was what they were trying to keep sealed inside. Okino stood at the top of those stairs for a full minute. She has said since that she considered turning around. "The danger was not anything I could identify," she said, "but my body was telling me something my training had no category for." She went down anyway, into the darkness. The descent took nearly 15 minutes. 312 feet below the library floor, the staircase opened into a chamber. Not a room, a vault. Approximately 40 feet by 60 feet, with arched ceilings that Dr. Elena Vasquez, a local historian who had spent years researching the property, immediately identified as consistent with Spanish colonial construction from the late 19th century. Her research had already uncovered something troubling. The land had changed hands 7 times between 1920 and 1965. Each transaction was structured to make identifying the real buyer nearly impossible. Shell companies, anonymous trusts, deliberately vague documentation, layered to ensure no one could trace who was actually acquiring the property. What I found looks less like real estate records and more like a paper trail created by people who understood exactly how to disappear from one. Then there were the surveys. Between 1945 and 1950, 3 separate geological surveys of the land were commissioned. All 3 submitted incomplete reports. 2 of the surveyors left New Mexico within months of starting their fieldwork. The third died in a car accident 6 weeks after his final visit to the property. 3 surveyors, 3 incomplete reports, 1 dead. Nobody had connected those details publicly until Vasquez started looking. The chamber itself was filled with artifacts. 47 wooden crates lined the walls, some intact, others deteriorated. Their contents spilled across the stone floor. Dust covered everything in the layered way that only comes from decades of undisturbed accumulation. But near certain crates, the dust had been disturbed recently. Someone had been inside this chamber before the FBI arrived, and it was not law enforcement. Inside one crate, agents found a leather-bound ledger dated 1947. Every page was filled with names, dates, and financial figures, all written in German. Another crate contained 63 photographs, fragile and yellowed, showing men in military uniforms that did not match any recognized armed force from any nation. Some photographs showed small gatherings in dimly lit rooms. Others captured locations that analysts still cannot identify. Several showed individuals whose names had been scratched away with surgical precision. Then there was one photograph that stopped the investigators completely. It showed a group of men standing in front of what appeared to be the entrance to this very tunnel. Taken sometime in the 1940s, based on clothing and image quality. 2 faces had been cleanly cut from the image. Not blurred, not scratched, cut out, gone permanently. Someone had decided those 2 people could never be identified under any circumstances. The symbols, the crates were disturbing. The photographs were worse. But when Okino's flashlight swept across the far wall of the chamber, she dropped her camera. The stone surface was covered in markings, hundreds of them, dense, precise, running from floor to ceiling in every direction. She photographed more than 300 individual symbols during the initial survey. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking. In 22 years of forensic work, she had never had a physical reaction to evidence. "I could not look at them directly for more than 30 seconds at a time," she said. "There was something about the precision, the intention behind them. Those markings made me feel, in a very specific way, like I was seeing something I was not supposed to see." Researchers examining her documentation found no consensus. Some markings resembled medieval alchemical notation, the kind of dense glyphs found in 16th century manuscripts that historians still argue about. Others looked like technical schematics belonging to a much later technological era. Lines, vectors, and notations more consistent with mid-20th century engineering than anything that should have existed inside a Spanish colonial vault. And a third subset fit neither category, symbols nobody could place at all. Dr. Marcus Webb was the astrophysicist brought in to analyze the documentation. He spent 3 weeks in a secured Federal Review room in Albuquerque with the photographs spread across 2 tables, working through the configurations section by section. By the 2nd week, colleagues noted he had stopped going home at night. He slept on a cot in the building. When he finally returned to the conference room to deliver his assessment, the people present remembered that he would not sit down. "Certain configurations are consistent with astronomical charting," he said. "If they represent real stellar positions, they would correspond to a date approximately 12,000 years in the past." He paused before continuing. "Or, and this is deeply unsettling, 12,000 years in the future. The mathematical relationships are not random. They reflect an understanding of orbital mechanics that would not have been achievable in the 19th century, when this chamber was supposedly constructed. Whoever carved these knew things they should not have known." 3 theories circulate among the small group of researchers who have seen the full documentation. The first, the work of a wealthy eccentric, an amateur occultist with too much time and money. The second, an encoded message system readable only by someone with the correct key. The third, and the one that keeps researchers awake at night, is that these symbols represent knowledge passed deliberately through generations of custodians who understood something about our world that was never intended to become common knowledge. If that third theory holds, everything the official record says about this estate is a surface layer laid over something far older and far stranger. The last image Okino photographed that night was a single panel of stone at the far end of the symbol wall. Lower right corner, 3 feet off the floor. A spiral carved deep into the rock, with what appeared to be a small human figure standing at its center. Above the figure, a line of script she had never encountered anywhere before. And beneath the figure, scratched into the stone in a hand that looked rushed, almost panicked, 3 letters in English. 3 letters that had no business appearing on a wall constructed 100 years before they were carved. RUN, the iron door. At the far end of the vault, behind a collapsed stack of crates, agents found something that brought the entire room to a standstill. An iron door, 8 feet tall, 4 inches thick. The surface was consumed by rust, crusted with decades of grime, clearly untouched for a very long time. No handle, no external mechanism any visitor could operate, only a heavy, corroded locking system built for a single purpose, to keep what was on the other side permanently sealed. The metallurgy itself raised questions. According to one analyst who reviewed the photographs, the alloy composition did not match anything consistent with late 19th century New Mexico fabrication. The construction suggested a much later origin, possibly the mid-20th century, which meant someone had returned to this chamber decades after it was first built, and installed a barrier of this seriousness, not to keep people out of the chamber, to keep something inside the chamber from getting out. One FBI agent, speaking anonymously, described the moment they pushed the crates aside and saw it. "We thought we understood what kind of place we were in," he said. "Then we saw the door, and everyone went completely quiet." He paused. It was not just old. It felt like it had been waiting down there longer than any of us had been alive, and whatever was on the other side was not waiting to be found. The iron door remains sealed to this day. The FBI has declined to comment on why no attempt has been made to open it. Official statements use language chosen not to inform, but to avoid informing. Some investigators believe the tunnel connects to a broader underground network. Cold War installations, older military infrastructure removed from official records. Others believe it leads to a secondary chamber containing whatever was considered too dangerous for the outer vault. A third group, the smallest, believes the door was sealed permanently by people who understood exactly what they were locking away and made a deliberate decision that it should never be opened. And here is the detail that reframes everything. Thermal imaging of the iron door revealed something nobody anticipated. There is airflow on the other side. Air is actively moving through whatever space exists beyond that barrier. The sensors picked up subtle temperature gradients consistent with a functioning ventilation system, not a sealed dead end, not a buried chamber that exhausted its oxygen 60 years ago. Something with circulation, something with a way in and a way out that nobody above ground has identified. The space does not end at the door. It continues deeper underground, further into whatever was built down there and sealed from the surface world. How far it goes, no official source will say. The thermal scans only penetrate so far before the readings dissolve into static. And the static itself extends well beyond any structure that could plausibly fit within the property boundaries. Miguel Reyes remembered one detail from his time on the project that had not fully registered until later. "Someone asked me about blast-resistant doors," he said. "Industrial grade, government facility specification, the kind of thing you install between yourself and a chemical event or worse." He shook his head. "I told them that was not work I did. They said they would find someone who could. And they did. I do not know who. I do not want to know who." The neighbors who knew, the neighbors always understood that the Hackman estate was different. Maria Sandoval had lived adjacent to the property for 15 years. "It was 2 o'clock in the morning," she remembers. "My dog woke me up barking. I went outside and heard something I could not place. A deep mechanical sound, muffled, like it was coming from underground. It lasted perhaps 20 minutes. Then it stopped. Her husband believed she had imagined it. But I know exactly what I heard," she said. "Something was operating beneath that property." Other neighbors reported similar experiences over the years. Unexplained vibrations that rattled glassware on shelves in homes a quarter-mile away. Unmarked trucks arriving in the middle of the night, with no visible logos, no license plates anyone could clearly read in the dark. Power fluctuations across the local grid that consistently traced back to the Hackman property. One neighbor reported seeing Hackman himself standing outside in the early hours of the morning, motionless, staring at a fixed point on his grounds for minutes at a time, sometimes longer. He never seemed to register the cold. The same point where investigators later located the tunnel entrance. Former staff members represent another thread nobody has fully examined. Multiple workers who left the estate simply cannot be located. Their last known addresses lead to dead ends, phone numbers disconnected, family members who say they have not heard from them in years and assumed they had simply moved on somewhere.